Hello and welcome to another skill of the week. And today we're going to be making a value chart using the pencils that we talked about in the video, Know Your Pencils. So this will help you determine what values work best on different drawings. And if you like to work in pencil, you know that high contrast is the most interesting to look at. So we're going to be making a value chart. So I like to take a middle grade pencil like an HB and just use my ruler across the middle and just draw two lines like so, okay? And then we're going to divide this up. Now this is a 9 by 12 piece of paper. So I'm going to divide it up into 1-inch sections. And on this particular ruler, the edge of the ruler isn't where we start measuring, it's this line right here. So just make sure that you are on the correct line when you start measuring. Now, your first and your last boxes are not going to be used. That way you don't have to be shading right up against the edge of the paper. Okay, and you just lightly mark out your boxes. Don't do it too dark because we don't want to gouge the paper or anything. And we want to have a nice transition between your value changes. And it's just a good habit to draw fairly lightly so you can make changes as you need to. There. So I'm going to start, and I'm going to label this value chart. Okay, I'm going to start with my 6B pencil, and just like we talked about in the Know Your Pencils page, video, you want to start out fairly light because you want to build your value slowly. You don't want to try to put it in there all at once, or else it becomes shiny and you can see the pencil lines and stuff like that. Now, right now, you can start to see my pencil lines, but I'm going to be building that value slowly. So my pencil lines will actually start to disappear. Now, I have a rule in my classroom that you can only use pencil for shading. You can't use your fingers to smudge. Now, it's obviously a different matter when it comes to charcoal. That's a whole different thing. Charcoal is meant to be blended with either a blending stump or your fingers. But pencil, when you blend it with your fingers, it ends up just getting all smudgy, and in my experience, it takes away all of that beautiful contrast that we are trying to achieve. And so I like to see people really work on their shading skills instead of their smudging skills, because to me it doesn't take much effort to just shade a little bit and then smudge it with your finger. That's not shading. That's just smearing it around. Okay? And I know some people have beautiful artworks with smudging, but I just think that they aren't very archival because the oils in your finger end up creating a yellowing on the page as the years go by. It collects dust, and that dust turns your paper almost dirty looking. So we don't want that on our papers. We want them to be lasting for years and years with the high contrast that you originally put on there with your pencil. Okay, so again, I'm still just working the value. I'm with my 6B, which is my softest pencil. Now, you can buy much softer pencils than this. They're almost charcoal quality, but for our drawing purposes in the classroom, 6B is as dark as we get. We will work in charcoal later, and you will learn how to work with a charcoal pencil and charcoal sticks, but right now you're learning how to do pencil and just use that pencil instead of smudging techniques. Now, as you build up the value, you can see I'm pressing a little bit harder, or at least maybe you can hear it. I don't know. I can hear it. And starting to not be able to see the pencil lines so much. Okay. We want that to be the blackest black that we can get. I'm going to grab my glasses just so I can really concentrate on the close-up of getting all those little fuzzy lines in there. Because one thing that you will notice when you are working with a soft pencil is you'll get these little fuzzy white speckles in there because the pencil is soft, so it has a hard time getting into little tiny nooks and crannies. And the harder the pencil is, the easier it's going to be to get in there. But also when you're working with a hard pencil, it's harder to get it to be as dark as a 6B pencil. So I always go with the 6B first. Try and make it as dark as I can without it being super shiny, because you don't want it to have a reflective quality. Of course, we can spray it a little bit with some matte spray, and that'll help. Okay, so I've gotten it pretty dark, but I'm going to go back with my middle grade pencil, like a 2B, and just fill in those little nooks and crannies, because the 2B is going to be hard enough to get into the nooks and crannies and yet soft enough to give that black a really nice dark value tone. There we go, that's looking much better. And this is what's going to give you those beautiful deep shades that you need when you are creating a really dark area, a dark shadow or something like that. Okay, now one thing that's nice about the 6B is, like you saw on my first square, you can start light, and we're just going to gradually shade over to white. Now, this is only a 10 box value scale, so obviously I can't go all the gradual shades that I would normally go, because I would go clear across. It would be pages long, okay, if I did all of the values that I possibly could. But I want a fairly decent gradation, and gradation is just your gradual change from dark to light, not seeing a whole lot of lines. Okay, now I'm not taking my time as much on this one because I'm able to overlap my black just a little bit, and it's not going to make it darker at this point. Okay, so I've gotten it fairly dark with my 6B, and I could move to my 4B, and since it's just a touch harder, I could fill in some more of those little sketchy, fuzzy areas that we might see. Now, what I might want to do before getting too dark on this one is work in my third box first before I get this too dark, so that I can compare the two values and then go back and darken this if I need to. That way I don't have to try to lighten it. If you get too much value in there all at once, boy, it's much more difficult to get it lighter. You can use a rubber eraser and tap out some of those values, but boy, it's much easier to go light first. Okay, so we're getting a little bit of a gradual change, but as you can see, we have those little speckles in there. So I'm going to go back with my 2B and just kind of fill in some of those little speckles, and that will smooth out my value and make it so that it's a little bit more generalized and even, and look like it's gradating lightly or gradually from that darker to that lighter value. Okay, not too hard. I'm not pressing too hard, but if I end up pressing too hard, I might need to take a rubber eraser in there and tap out any value. Okay. So I've gotten most of those little speckles out, and what I'm going to do is go ahead and jump to this one because I want to make sure that I'm going to be able to get it to white in that second to last box. So I'm going to go ahead and switch to the 4B since I've done 6B in the first two boxes. I'm going to keep it pretty light. working slowly. Going in different directions so that my lines kind of disappear, but I am working those lines close together. That helps me make them disappear. If I'm scribbling them all across far apart, then it's more likely that I'll see my lines. But I've tried to keep my lines as close together as possible. This will help you get used to the tension that you need to put on your pencil for different values that you need. You need a really dark value, you can work into it slowly and start putting more and more pressure on your pencil. But if you need those light tones, you really need to not push down on the pencil very much at all. And I like to keep my fingers back away from the pencil tip when I'm trying to keep it light, because then I can't push down very hard. Okay, so I'm getting a pretty good even value. And now I can go back in with my 2B and just smooth things out. Getting a pretty good gradation. And I see some darker areas here and some spots in there. So I'm just going to work around those areas to try and even up the value so that I don't go back over them and darken those areas as well. Now it looks like I might have darkened that just a touch too much. My paper really isn't that grainy, so it might be my pencil that is creating the grain. But if I work slow and just kind of work in little squiggles, I can get it to be pretty smooth. And this is where that rubber eraser, and a lot of people call it a kneaded eraser, I just call it a rubber eraser because it's kind of rubbery, can really be your best friend. I'm going to grab one of those. And you just stretch it out. And I like to make a point, because you can see on my paper a couple of the spots that are darker. I want to blend those in. So I want to just tap it out so that I don't have those little dark specks in there. It makes it much more even. And if I get too much out, I can always go back in and touch it up. So that evened it out quite a bit. Okay, and as you can see, I'm trying to keep my hands away from smudging my paper. Keep my hand away from it as much as possible. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and start with my 2B. And this one, as you get into those middle grades and the lighter shades, you really have to work slower because as you can see on the 2B, my pencil lines are more likely to show up because it is a harder lead, and those harder leads are harder to disguise than the softer leads. So we have to work slowly, and you can see my fingers are way much farther back on the pencil than they were when I was working with the softer leads. Okay, so just really lightly going back over, changing the direction of my pencil so that I can disguise the lines. Now, this only works if you work lightly. If you are a person who tends to shade kind of dark to start, and you try to go this way and then this way, your lines are going to show up just because you're working too dark all at once. You need to practice working lightly, and then your pencil lines won't show. And you don't have to use your finger to smudge it. It's kind of nice having that textural effect in your pictures, especially if you're doing people and you have skin tones and things like that. Because if everything is perfectly smooth, that's really not what our skin looks like. Our skin has little pores and little hairs and little imperfections that we really want to try to capture when we are drawing. So why smooth it all out and make it perfectly smooth? It's just not realistic. We're not Barbie dolls. Okay, just lightly going back and forth over it to try to get that all blended in and get that gradual change that I want. Now, it's a pretty big shift from here to here, yes. But I want to make sure I can get to white. So if I need to, I can always go back to this one and darken it a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and stick with the 2B and go to this one and try and keep it light. Now, this time I'm going to really move my fingers back on the pencil and barely put any pressure on that pencil because I'm starting to really get into those light middle grades. I might even need to switch to a lighter pencil, but I'm just going to test it out for now. Now when I'm shading, I tend to not do as much talking because I'm concentrating. So if there are lapses in the talking, you'll understand why. Okay, and I can see because of the type of pencil I have, it's left a few little speckles on there, so I might just want to tap that out a little bit in those areas. Now, I can see that it's too close. I think the value change is not quite as good as I would like, so I'm going to go back in with my 4H to this one and smooth it out. That way I can get gradual changes without having to do too much change on the value itself, but you will be able to see the shift a little bit better. And I could even work this 4H, since it's so hard, back into this value if I wanted to, and really smooth that out. And that way you could really see a little bit more subtlety and smoothness in the shift. I'm going to just go back in there and smooth that out. And when I need to take my time, I get my fingers closer to the pencil head and go in between those darker areas so that I can blend them in a little bit better. Remember, you always want to work with your B pencils first, those are the soft ones, and your H pencils last. Make sure that you get all the values in that you need with your B pencils first, and then you work those H pencils after. Sometimes when I'm working on a drawing, I can work for hours on just one section just to make sure all of my values are what I want. And I might come back the next day and not be satisfied and go back into an area that I'd worked on 2 days before. So it's okay to go back and rework areas. Don't be precious with an area. Okay, so things are starting to smooth out a little bit more now. I like the directions that's going. Okay. That's making the shift in value a little bit more noticeable without being a gigantic jump in value. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and stick with my 4H and smooth this one because it was looking a little on the grainy side. Sorry, the bell you just heard was the bell for the next class. And we'll probably be hearing a tarting bell here pretty soon in just a couple of minutes. I was hoping I would be done with this by then, but not happening, I guess. That's okay. Okay, and just cleaning up my edges, making sure I keep my value chart neat. And going in and touching up any areas that got a little darker than I wanted. Rubber erasers really have their benefits. You don't want to overuse them. Sometimes they can get all smeary if you don't if you overuse them, if you're not careful. Okay, so I'm pretty satisfied with that. Maybe go one more direction just to clean it up a little. Pretty good value change. Looks like it's a little lighter in this area, so go in there and just blend that in. Sometimes what I like to do when I'm working on a drawing is step back, just lean back and see it from a distance and kind of blur my eyes a little bit, kind of make them go unfocused. That can help you to see your value changes a little bit too. And that way you can see if you've got big jumps or if things are gradual or what. Okay, so I am going to go ahead and move to my 2H because now I'm getting into these really light values and I want to make sure that I keep those values as light as I can. And I'm really working slow and I'm keeping my pencil or my hand back away from the pencil lead so I don't accidentally push too hard on that and get it to be too dark of a value. Now this one you have to be a little more careful when you change directions with your pencil, because if you go straight across on something as light as this, you're likely going to see your pencil lines. So I like to go at a slight slant from what I had previously done, keep my lines a little shorter instead of going all the way across, do little sections. Try to keep your movements as close together as possible so that you don't see your lines. Now, since I did that slanted one, I'm going to go ahead and go in this direction to try to pull all that value together. And if I need to, go another direction. You can see that it's starting to all blend together. And that top layer, I'm able to go all the way across and keep it fairly even and blended because I've got a couple layers below that. So that helps get that smoothed out. I am overlapping a little bit because I'm trying to keep that whole layer smooth. So I'm getting outside of my lines. But since it's a value chart, I'm not as concerned as I would be if I were drawing a person's face or something like that. Because I can always go back in and clean it up. So there's my next value. Pretty light, but still gradating from black to light. Okay, so let's see, I had my 2H, so I think I'm going to go ahead and move to my 4H because this is where I need to be white. So I need to get these last three really changing to the lightest possible value that I can. Now, you can see that I've got quite a point on this 4H pencil. To me, the H pencils really work better when they're a little bit dulled down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my paper over and kind of dull that tip down just a little bit.